Hi folks, yep, it's me. I am back for another Movies by the Month. And apologies for the lateness and general lack of uploads on the channel, but things are just kind of trying to tick back into making sense of the world. So I wanted to take a bit of advantage right now to make some good of some free time and actually get a few videos put together out to you lovely folks. And yep, it's September. And yep, although it's not September anymore, these are the films I saw in September. And some of them were quite different and quite strange. So let's just dive straight in with The Man From U.N.C.L.E. That's a film that's on Netflix at the moment, and I'm sure that's what you're thinking, but, you know, Ian, The Man From U.N.C.L.E. is a 1960s TV show that had Robert Vaughn and David McCallum as a kind of chalk and cheese US and Russian pair of spies who teamed up and saved the world from baddies every week, you know, while making silly quips at each other and doing fights and chatting up some girls and whatever was the fetching gear of the day. And that's true, but did you know that Guy Ritchie, the ex-husband of Madonna and the enfant terrible of the London gangster movie scene, actually did a movie version of the old show? He updated it much in the kind of the same way that he did with the Sherlock Holmes films, where he took the concept but then changed it into more of a rollicking adventure with a new twist on the characters. And in the case of The Man From U.N.C.L.E., he took Henry Cavill, who you'd probably recognise as the most recent Superman or Geralt off The Witcher.
Toss a coin to your Witcher, O Valley of...
Nope, none of that. Anyway, he plays Napoleon Solo, you know, the Robert Vaughn role. And then you've got Armie Hammer as the Ilya Kuryakin character. And you might remember him from the Lone Ranger movie. And they're both in a convoluted plot to manage to escape her off Ex Machina, who in this film is playing a German mechanic, and getting her out of East Berlin and uncover a plot all about nuclear weapons and rich people and all sorts of crazy wacky nonsense in a film that's kind of half action comedy and very much a pastiche of 60s fashion and style. And I kind of enjoyed it. It's nowhere near as good as the Sherlock Holmes films. I mean, mainly because it's so convoluted and frankly, these days, this pair of mismatched heroes' personalities feel a bit more irritating rather than endearing. But it's a fun film. It's genuinely funny, and it's a shame that it bombed at the box office because they set up the end of it potentially for a more fun sequel that, to be honest, could have been a lot better. I mean, certainly, the Sherlock Holmes sequel is actually better than the first film, so it would stand to reason this one would have been as well. But that likely isn't happening now as everyone involved is now off doing other things. But yeah, 3 out of 5. It's a total Saturday night popcorn movie, and you could definitely do an awful lot worse than watching this. Next up is another film I found on Netflix, and that was In the Tall Grass. And this is a horror film that's an adaptation of the novella co-written by Stephen King, who I'm guessing you've probably heard of, and his son, who actually writes under the name Joe Hill, who wrote a movie called Horns, which you might have seen, which is a kind of strange but fun movie about him off Harry Potter turning into a demon, sort of. Anyway, In the Tall Grass. It's about a brother and a sister who are on their way to an adoption place because it turns out Big Sis has a bun in the oven and a bit of a crappy absentee boyfriend. So they decide to stop for a vomit break at the roadside and they hear the sound of a wee kid shouting for help lost in a tall grass field beside an old church. So of course, being that these are decent people, they go into the grass and immediately get themselves lost because, of course, there's something weird and wrong and strange about this field. And it seems to be able to move them around secretly, not only in space but in time. And of course it turns out they're not the only ones who are trapped in there. And frankly, this was kind of a mediocre movie. I mean, not even saved by the actors at least trying. And even like Blumhouse alumni Patrick Wilson as a funny and creepy used car salesman dad. And the problem is that the idea feels really, really stretched out. And just when you think the whole story is coming to a head, it sort of spins off in mumbo-jumbo directions and doesn't really explain things and throws in lots of daft turns and little side threads that never actually tie up. I mean, really, it would have been much better as a short film rather than a full-length movie. And it's a 2 out of 3 at best, and really that's just considering the pedigree of the writers, you would expect a bit more from it. But I think in this case, somebody just greenlit it because of the names on the tin, and then the fact that they were going to shoot it for cheap as chips because it's basically all been shot in a field. So yeah, it's not really one to write home about. I would probably give it a miss. On a very different track from that was the Irish black comedy that I found on Amazon Prime, Bad Day for the Cut. Now, the title Bad Day for the Cut, it's an old farming expression, and it means basically the weather isn't very good to go out harvesting crops. So this is kind of a quirky, moderately budgeted movie that's very much in the mould of other Irish black comedies. So think of the work of people like the McDonough brothers who made films like Calvary or the multi-Oscar winning 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, which is just... oh, it's just so good. Such a good movie.
Why don't you put that on your Good Morning Missouri fucking wake-up broadcast, bitch?
Anyway, Bad Day for the Cut is not anywhere near on the same level as that, but I mean, it's still a really good film nonetheless. And it's all about a farmer, like, who's got an old infirm mother, and she ends up getting murdered. And then the killers end up coming after him, but because they're kind of inept, he ends up getting one of them to kind of help him work his way up the chain and discover why people are targeting his family. And I'd give it a 4 out of 5 because it's really funny. And also it's very dark and bleak because that's kind of how Irish comedy do. And there aren't really that many well-known faces in this, unless you watch an awful lot of, like, British TV. But still, everyone acquits themselves really, really well, and it's kind of fun. Just be prepared for there being some blood and some very nasty language all round. And to follow on from that Irish movie, this was a low-budget Scottish film called Get Duked, which is supposedly a comedy and also a horror film, when really it's neither of those things. It's a really boring slog, but we can get to that. Essentially, this is about the British school kid club called the Duke of Edinburgh Award, which is kind of a thing you do at school that basically, it looks good on CVs and it's mostly about hill walking and orienteering and that kind of stuff. And anyway, there's like these 3 little delinquent Neds and they get sent on it, and they've got like one nice posh kid who's with them, and he's really all about doing the whole club while they really don't care. And almost immediately, the whole lot of them start getting hunted by Eddie Izzard, who's a posh tweed-wearing duke. And this film is a mess. I mean, the whole film is really scrappily put together. The writing's terrible. The jokes almost completely, universally don't land and aren't funny. And the plot makes absolutely zero sense. I mean, case in point, there's a subplot at one point about how one of the kids is an aspiring hip-hop artist called DJ Beetroot. And he gives a CD to a local farmer, who then shows it to his pals, and the boys happen to, wander into their big piss-up in a barn, and the DJ does them a big musical number. And it's kind of cringy and silly, but it's probably the high point of the movie. But what's bonkers is, the next morning, the farmers all just leave the boys, to themselves, and they never ask for a help or a lift home or anything, despite the fact they know that they are literally being hunted by posh psychos. And it's also funny that in the grand tradition of, like, low-key British films, they pull in a load of familiar faces. Like Kate Dickie, who's, a great actress, but isn't exactly choosy about what she's in. I mean, literally, she turns up in anything. And the same goes for Alice Lowe, who has a wee cameo in this as well, and James Cosmo, who you'd recognise from everything ever. And yeah, this is like a 1 out of 5, and I'm only giving it that for the nice scenery and the fact that I actually laughed once at one joke. So yeah, don't get duked, more like get duped. So yeah, absolutely don't bother with this piece of nonsense. Now, to wash that awful taste of bad movie out of my eyes and my ears, and yours as well, let's look at a proper classic that I watched, and that was The Birds. Yep, the famous Hitchcock classic movie, because you see, I picked up a whole box set of his movies, and I'm going to probably work my way through them and see what's going on over the next few months. Based loosely on a short story by Daphne du Maurier, who also wrote Rebecca, which is coming to Netflix soon, and probably actually out by the time this video gets released. This is all about a blonde, self-important socialite called Melanie, who meets a sly lawyer called Mitch, and after he puts her in her place, she decides to pursue him up to his family home in Bodega Bay, where a whole bunch of weird bird attacks start to begin, leading to the whole townsfolk ending up under siege by flocks of winged death machines. And this film is an absolute classic. I mean, not only is it peak Hitchcock with rising tension, a kind of ever-present eeriness, and particularly odd by modern standards, romance between stiff but cool besuited man and a difficult blonde bombshell. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people these days would say that there was a lot of problematic elements in this, but it's of its time. But this film is also the footprint in style for pretty much half of every horror film that's a bad thing comes to a small town. I mean, we've all seen loads of these sorts of things, and they're still being made to this day. It kind of feels like this and probably the old John Wyndham stories really set the style for this sort of story. And yeah, I loved it, 5 out of 5. It never lets up, and it has an absolutely brilliant scene where the characters all start debating whether there's actually a problem, and it's really fascinating and kind of timeless, but it's also really funny. So yeah, totally. I mean, if you haven't seen it by now, check out The Birds. It's flapping fantastic. Another fairly solid and enjoyable film that I saw was one that's been doing the round on Netflix for ages that I never got around to, and that was The Siege of Jadotville. Or Jadotville? Anyway, whatever it's called, it's the true story of an Irish company of new recruits sent out to protect a base in South Africa at the start of the 1960s. But it turns out that the local warlord there has just seceded from the rest of the country, and the new state of Katanga wants the UN to get out, especially after a load of overzealous UN troops managed to shoot up a hospital. So, as a result, the Katanganese troops and a whole bunch of French mercenaries start attacking the Jadotville compound, and only the wits and ingenuity of the Irish troops, led by him of 50 Shades of Grey, can save them all from brutal death. Now, okay, I joke about Jamie Dornan there, but what else can you do but joke about the 50 Shades trilogy? But I mean, the fact is, he's actually a pretty good actor, and he was amazing in a wee film I saw called Anthropoid, which is all about the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich during World War II in Czechoslovakia. Seriously, that's a really good film, you should check it out, although it's really grim and sad. But the Siege of Jadotville is kind of a bit of a war romp. I mean, basically, it's just Zulu. I mean, you remember Zulu, you know, Michael Caine and Stanley Baker, you know, fighting off wave after wave of thousands of Zulu warriors with only about 150 men in a wee mission post of Rorke's Drift. You know, the whole bit with the fighting and the red outfits and the song at the end, and it's a great movie. You know it's a great movie, we all love Zulu. But essentially, this is exactly the same film. I mean, it's the same premise, and they're both true stories, but this has been paced to almost exactly the same way. I mean, they knew what they were doing here. And it's good fun. It's got good action, and you genuinely feel like it's an effort made not to vilify or heroise everybody in it too much. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's a fun wee 3 out of 5 action war movie. Okay, now, you might remember from last time that I made a big thing about the fact that I got a 7-day free trial of Shudder, and I watched a bunch of horror movies. Well, I managed to find a way to actually get a free 30 days from it on top of that, so I did that, and so I've been watching some more horror films. And one of the movies I saw was a micro-budget movie called Host. And this is probably about the most 2020 movie idea I've ever heard, because it's basically set right now, right in the middle of lockdown during the coronavirus, and it's about a bunch of pals who have a regular Saturday night Zoom meeting. And this week they decide for a laugh to spook it up a bit and make it exciting. So Hayley, who's kind of the de facto host in question, hence the title, has brought in a pal who's a medium, and they're going to have a seance. Of course, nobody's really taking it that seriously, they're joking, they're drinking a lot, some people end up dropping out from bad internet, and they're not really following the rules at the seance, and they accidentally end up letting a big nasty demonic entity attack them and break into the houses and stuff. It's some fairly predictable scares, and spooky things start to happen. And fair enough, this is a total ultra low budget movie, and one that literally only lasts an hour because it's meant to be just the length of the booked Zoom chat. And it's far from the first film to use this sort of computer-style screen filmmaking, which was done best probably in the film Searching, which if you haven't seen, it's really worthwhile checking out. It's a detective mystery told entirely through a computer desktop screen. And it's much better than that sounds. They also did the same thing on the horror movie film Unfriended, that used kind of chat room techniques and Facebook pages and stuff to pretty good effect, but even though those films are a little bit naff. But Host doesn't actually try to aim for the moon. It's quite happy to use a lot of stuff you've seen done elsewhere. It tries to tie it in quite well. I mean, if you're like me and you've seen found footage films before, then you've probably seen every trick used umpteen times and over paranormal activities or various other things. Now, yeah, there's a couple of Zoom-specific related moments of ingenuity here, but mostly it's stuff you've seen done elsewhere before. But it's a bit of a giggle, there's a few nice wee scares. It's a pretty good film for a Halloween evening. So yeah, it could be right up your street come the second lockdown that's probably going to happen over Christmas. So yeah, 3 out of 5 for Host. Check it out, it's fun. Now, this might disappoint some people, it might not, but I know that we're in lockdown, but I actually had to admit, I did actually go out to the cinema in September. Yep, I wore a mask, I went when it was really quiet, you know, and I used alcohol gel in my hands going in and coming back out, but the fact was, they opened the cinemas up, so I went to see Tenet. Now, Tenet, not Tenant, as I kept saying for ages, is a new Christopher Nolan film. And it's likely that you've seen some of his stuff, considering that apart from movies like, you know, the recent Batman trilogy, Inception, Interstellar, he's also done classics like the dueling magicians movie, The Prestige, and the cop film Insomnia. And he did that sort of backwards, short-term memory loss movie Memento, which, you know, was pretty cool. And that last one is kind of important if you think about Tenet, because although he worked in compressing story and time in Dunkirk, he did it more so in Memento. And Tenet is all about a CIA operative who sees something strange happen on a mission, and he gets recruited into a super secret organisation, where all you need to know once you're in is the name Tenet and a hand signal. And that gets him embroiled in a big globe-trotting adventure out to stop an evil billionaire who has access to nukes and things, and a beautiful woman involved, and... Wait a minute, this is actually basically the same plot as The Man From U.N.C.L.E. And pretty much every James Bond movie ever, come to think about it. But anyway, the big thing about Tenet is that part of the story involves things going backwards in time. I mean, that means literally cars going backwards and bullets flying out of walls and into guns, and, you know, that's right off the bat, it's a big mystery of the film. And the problem I had with Tenet was that that's mostly then forgotten for about half the movie while it's bogged down in a vaguely interesting but fun James Bondy, Jason Bourne sort of thing, while the protagonist and his pal, the guy off Twilight, rush around heisting and the like. Only the story then suddenly remembers all the backward stuff and jumps into loads of that in the second half. And it looks great. I mean, it's a film that looks fantastic, and it does get a bit dull now and again, and not helped by the first half being incredibly vague and the sound mix being so bad that sometimes you literally can't hear what they're saying because the music's so loud, or the sound effects are drowning out the dialogue, which is a kind of odd decision in a film that's complicated and needs explaining. So yeah, anyway, I give this a 3 out of 5, and say it's not actually probably worth heading out to the cinema to see it, just especially if you're worried about COVID and things. If you've got a big telly at home, just wait for it to come out on Blu-ray, or when it eventually comes out on Netflix or Amazon, then just watch it then. So yeah, that was the films I watched in September. So again, sorry about how long it took for this to come out. October should be out a lot faster because I've already written it all down and I'm literally about to start recording it now, right now. So hopefully right into the beginning of November there will be an October Movies by the Month video. And the rest of my videos, my weekly reviews of things, they are on the way. There is stuff coming. There's something else jumped up in the way that I am going to actually have to review first, just because it's actually just started. Some of you might be able to guess what that is if you've been following the channel for a while. But I will be finishing Tales from the Loop, and after that I'll be getting onto some other stuff, which some of you might appreciate more, some maybe less. But anyway, that's it for now. If you don't already, then please do follow me on Twitter and chat to me there. I'll try and be on it more often. There is the Facebook group, and yep, you can always sign up to the Patreon if you want. It's been paused for the last couple of months, but if I'm cranking out material, I'll let that go back to normal again. But yeah, till next time, I've been Ian, and these have been my grumpy opinions. And a special thanks to everybody listening, and especially my patrons, and most especially to Michelle Forbes and Judith Coloma, my top tier patrons. Thank you everybody. Everybody stay safe. Cheerio.